Who were the most free people ever to live up and down the centuries? Certainly the saints. They were free precisely because they were not enslaved by outside or interior dangers. They defeated or held off addictions. They rejected unneeded delights in the world. And they had a single-minded focus on God. So when Pope Benedict XVI encourages us parents to teach our children how to exercise freedom, he's in essence encouraging us to raise saints in this digital age, to raise kids who are both holy and prudent and saints. So then that brings us to the last section. How can we parents do this? How can we do this? Understanding that new media has infiltrated the lives of young people, understanding that it's filled with plenty of dangers, and understanding that the church has given us some wisdom on how to respond to those. What does that look like practically? How can we raise saints in the digital age? In the book of Wisdom, there's this beautiful verse in the 8th chapter that says, she, wisdom, teaches temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude. Man can have nothing more profitable in life than these: temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude. Traditionally, the church has called these the 4 cardinal virtues. The word cardinal coming from the Latin cardo, which means hinge. These virtues are the hinges on which the moral life swings, and therefore the hinges on which the online lives of our children also swings. And so the possible saintliness of the young people around us swings on their practice of these 4 cardinal virtues. I consider them, therefore, the antidotes to all that plagues the digital world. So one by one, we'll look at each of these 4, seeing how we can encourage their use and their acceptance in our own children, and how they really counter all the dangers that we've covered so far. The first one is temperance. Temperance can easily be defined as the practice of moderation and self-control. In 1971, the Vatican released a pastoral letter called Communio et Progressio, and there they say, Catholic media consumers should exercise self-control. They must not allow themselves to be so beguiled by media that they neglect urgent duties or simply waste time. So how can we teach our kids to exemplify and practice temperance in the digital age? One answer, and the simplest one, is disconnection. In 2007, the Barna Group did a survey that showed that the majority of young people never take intentional time to disconnect from the digital world. In this survey, they found that nearly half of teenagers and parents admitted to texting or talking on the phone during dinner within the last week. More so, half of the young people surveyed checked email or text messaging in bed during the last week. And so this younger generation is one who is perpetually connected to these modern new media tools and who finds great difficulty in letting go and disconnecting. The survey also offered some anecdotes, and one of the ones I found most amusing was multiple times these new media tools were described by teenagers and college students almost as an extra appendage. They would say, when I don't have my cell phone with me, I feel like my arm is missing. And so that's how tightly bound many of them are to these tools. So how do we help them disconnect? One thing I suggest is maybe in your family, consider hosting a digital Sabbath. 1 day a week, just one. Have your family turn off all digital devices together. The best day, I think, is Sunday. Have your family not engage in Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, text messaging, or any of these tools from the moment they wake up until the moment they go to sleep. In my own family, we try to practice this to varying degrees of success. We leave our cell phones on, but we try not to text message or use the computer or watch television. Inevitably, there's a time when someone sneaks to check an email or something, but the practice and the intention is what's important. If you make it known in your family that central to your family's identity and priority is the disconnection of these tools, it can really help separate the bondage many kids have toward technology. Another way to fast is to make it a goal not to use any sort of media while you eat. And that's a simple tool, especially when we're talking about eating dinner as a family, and especially when we're talking about young children who crave the presence of parents. I am a mechanical engineer, and so I work a typical 8 to 5 job. And as Dr. Neal mentioned, we have 2 young kids who go to bed at 7:30 at night. And so I come home at 5:30, and have a period of a couple hours to spend with the kids. And I found that the best time for me to disconnect is during that time. That's the time when I don't want to be on the computer or on the cell phone. I don't want my young children tugging on my arm, begging to spend time with me. And so in addition to fasting on Sundays, we've also made it a goal in our home not to use any of this technology before our kids go to bed. And it's really helped. Another idea would be maybe to fast from social media during one of the church's liturgical seasons, like Advent or Lent. I haven't done it myself, too intimidated so far, but I've met a number of people who have testified to its great power. They say things like, I've learned more about myself. I grew in my relationship with God because I wasn't so reliant and dependent on using a lot of these tools. Another way to encourage temperance in this digital age is through moderation. Not simply a hard break like disconnection, but moderation. One mother I know goes by what she calls the one rule. This means that in her house they have one TV, one computer, one electronic device per family. That prevents the terrible situation where everyone is sitting in the same room together, each on their own device. And so just having one device where people are forced to share and use it appropriately, that curbs a lot of the abuses of excessive use. Another mom has a system where she gives poker chips to each of her children at the beginning of each week. They each get 14 poker chips, and the poker chips are not to be used for cards or gambling, but can be redeemed for half an hour of media use, whenever the kids want. However, the twist is that at the end of the week, the kids can turn in their poker chips and receive 50 cents for each one. Doing this forces the kids to prioritize their use of media and assures that they won't just spend time mindlessly wasting their time browsing the internet or doing something that they never wanted to do in the first place. Now, anytime we talk about disconnecting or moderating, you can be sure that when it comes to young people, it's going to produce resistance. I won't stand here and pretend that if you go home and tell your child that we're turning off all media on Sundays, that you're not going to have some sort of pushback. They're going to complain, they're going to gripe, they'll probably lament. But your goal as a parent is not to raise children who are merely happy and content and comfortable, though those are certainly good things, but children who are saints, children who inculcate the virtues like temperance and moderation. The last element of temperance I think we can encourage in the digital age is chastity. Obviously, this confronts the danger of pornography, but it confronts many other ones as well. I have a picture of Pope John Paul II on there, and I use that because I think when it comes to chastity, he's offered the church one of the greatest gifts in this field in the church's entire history. Throughout his pontificate, over about 5 years, he laid out a series of messages and teachings into what's now become known as the theology of the body. Coming on the heels of the destructive sexual revolution, these teachings proposed a new revolution, a refreshing look at man and woman, on what it means to be a human being and have a body, what it means to relate, and how our relationships image the relationships of God. We'll touch on this a little bit more under the virtue of justice, but for now, suffice it to say, the theology of the body, I think, is a primary antidote to the internet's greatest danger, which is pornography. But as I mentioned, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The second cardinal virtue in the digital age is prudence. This one is probably the most nebulous of the four, but it can be defined as making the right decision at the right time. It's something difficult to teach because it's very contextualized. How do you respond appropriately to any given situation? And so how can we help our children to make the right decision at the right time in the digital world? The first thing I'll say is that one way to do this, and one thing I recommend to all parents, is to have as much transparency as possible when it comes to your children's use of media. So in my opinion, all parents should have the usernames and the passwords of all their children's social media accounts or their blogs or any other media that they use. Now that doesn't mean that you check on it every single day. That doesn't mean you're looking over their shoulder as they're typing, but it does mean that the possibility exists, that anything they publish you can see. And therefore that element of transparency helps produce prudence all by itself. But you can't monitor everything that your children do online. And so we need to properly form our children to engage when we're not around, when mom and dad aren't there peering at what's going on. So for example, we can moderate the media in our own home, but what happens when your child goes and visits their friend's house or the library or another public setting where they can go on a computer? So moderation and transparency aren't necessarily a catch-all solution. It needs to be supplemented with prudence. One way to develop prudence in young people is through what I call digital literacy. This is the art, the skill of being able to measure online claims against the claims and the teachings of the church. And so for instance, if they're in a Facebook discussion about a controversial topic, say gay marriage or abortion or stem cell research, and they see many different dueling and competing claims, how do they know which ones are true? This harkens back to that example of online relativism and the Wikipedia effect I mentioned before. We need to train our children how to measure those claims through all of the church's ancient tools. Probably the most clearest explanation of what the church teaches comes in the form of the catechism. And so one way we can help our children act prudently in the online world is in the offline world to teach them how to use the catechism, so that when they enter into a discussion online, they know where to look to find the church's teachings and opinions. We also need to teach them that every website and tool they use has an agenda. Most of the tools that are free have a particularly strong agenda. Sometimes that's good. In the case of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops website, they have a definite agenda to help people embrace and live and flourish in their Catholic faith. But sometimes not. Tools like Facebook offer advertisements that merely seek to get you to click and to buy and to consume and to conform your life to however the advertisers want it to be. So one way that we can teach our kids about this is maybe to look through an editorial piece online, maybe a blog article, or even a Facebook comment, and quiz them on the potential agendas, the potential ideological slants. Were they Catholic? Were they intentionally anti-Catholic? Were they trying to push forward a particular political agenda or maybe a social agenda? We can teach them how to become literate in reading the signs of the digital world, and therefore they will understand them and not be overcome by them. Like the example I used of Tai Chi, they can understand the forces pushing against them and cooperating and understanding with them react appropriately.